Hello, my name is Jessica, and I'm a nutritionist with Mad Barn. I started this series, The People Behind the Horses, to highlight the positive growth that's occurring in the horse industry and to talk with the individuals that are pioneering that change. So today I'm really excited to be joined with Amelia Newcomb with Amelia Newcomb Dressage. And Amelia has built an incredible platform that brings a holistic approach to dressage training. It combines natural horsemanship techniques with classical dressage and a method that's adaptable to each individual horse. So thank you, Amelia, for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and start at the beginning. How did you get involved in horses and in dressage specifically?
I started riding in elementary school. Some of my friends were riding and they were like, oh, you should start riding lessons. So I started riding lessons. I think I got like 4 lessons for Christmas one year. And
Mm-hmm.
then you know how it is. Once you get started, you can just never stop riding. It becomes such a passion.
Yeah, I think that is very relatable to both myself and probably a lot of our viewers that it once you sit on that horse or the pony for the first time, it's downhill from there. You're caught. You're in the industry. And so what led you to build your business that you have?
It kind of started actually by accident. So I have always loved riding and loved training and loved teaching. I started out at first, I did a lot of young horses and problem horses, and that's kind of my natural horsemanship background. And then I moved to California, and same thing. I always got the horses that no one else wanted to ride, the difficult horses. I started teaching a lot, but I've always wanted to be able to help more people. And
Mm-hmm.
like all over the world, and people that maybe don't have access to an amazing trainer because they live in the middle of nowhere, which happened to me growing up in Colorado. And my brother had a YouTube channel and he was like, oh, you should start making some videos. And I was like, yeah, sure. Okay, whatever. So I started just posting one video a week. And then all of a sudden I realized that I could actually help people through the internet learn to ride better, which I never thought was possible. And then once I started hearing stories of people like, oh my gosh, like that really helped me and you've helped me so much with my horse, then I knew I was like, okay, I have to go all in and just try to help as many people as I can through the internet. So it's been really exciting and really fun, but it was definitely not a plan of mine.
Yeah, I feel like, especially in the post-COVID era, we're really realizing like how far and limitless reach can be just because we do have the ability. I mean, you're in California, I'm in Florida right now, but we're still able to connect and have these conversations. So I think that's really awesome and that it's come into something so big. So I did spend some time on your website. And one of the first things that kind of popped out to me was the words dressage for all. And I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about what that means to you.
So it has many meanings, but the first part of it is that part of what I love about dressage is that it really helps all horses, and all horses can do dressage. So, whether you have like a little off the track thoroughbred or a pony or a quarter horse or a big
Mm-hmm.
fancy warm blood, any horse can improve when we follow the training scale and when we teach them to do dressage. It makes them healthier, it makes them happier, it helps them to relax and all of that. So that's the first part, is that any horse can do dressage. But then also, I think what's really important to me is that dressage is more accessible to everyone, because I also believe that any person, any rider that wants to learn, that wants to improve, that you can, and that you should have access to good education and good resources. And so I really work to create a inclusive community where we include all different ages, all different levels, all different disciplines. Like we have riders in Western saddles, in jumping saddles, in hackamores. It doesn't really matter so long as you want to learn and you're dedicated to your horse and really teaching your horse through step-by-step process and through kindness and through understanding. So dressage for all is really meaning all riders and all
Mm-hmm.
horses. And one thing that I really find important is that we're supportive of one another in this journey. And it is so hard. Riding is so hard. So much can go wrong. And it's really important that you're offering that support and that encouragement to one another and staying positive as much as possible, so that at the end of the day, we do this for fun and we love our horses and we want to take care of our horses. And we always have to keep coming back to that positivity and that supporting of one another.
Wow, I love that. You've encompassed so many different like topics all in there. You know, everybody struggles with something, and it's important to remember you're not alone. It's not just you and your horse has this one problem that nobody else is dealing with. I know as an amateur rider, I often have to remind myself that this is, you know, a bump that everybody is going through, or several riders are going through. So to create that community where you can all come together, and then also to have advice how to overcome that is, you know, something that's really useful in the industry. And I mean, looking at your website, it's so expansive. There's so many topics covered. Let's say you have a rider who is new to dressage. Is there a training tip, video, or a series that you recommend they start with?
I always like to start with rider position. I think like rider position is the foundation of everything, because when you're in the correct position, you stay balanced and you don't fall off, and you start to feel more confident because you can communicate to your horse and get your horse to go and turn and stop and like all of those basic things. So I always like to start with rider position. And I do, if you go to my website, Amelia Newcomb Dressage, there's a bunch of free resources. And I do have videos and a PDF all on rider position. So that's what I always start with. And then another big passion of mine is groundwork. So for those of you that have a horse that's like difficult, or if you're having some kind of a training problem, or just if you're having trouble communicating with your horse or getting your horse to relax, I always recommend starting with your horse on the ground, because the way that your horse is on the ground is going to be mirrored in the riding. So what I mean by that is, like, when you're walking your horse, if you stop, your horse should stop. If you back up, your horse should back up. If you ask your horse to put their head down, they should put their head down. And when you establish that basic communication with your horse on the ground, then when you get on, you have a chance of feeling connection and feeling like your horse is with you and paying attention. Because I don't know about you, but I don't really like riding horses that are out of control.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think, you know, starting with your position it's something that we can control, you know, to some extent, right? I can't always tell my horse exactly what I want them to do, but if I can say, okay, you know, for me, make sure all of my parts are where they need to be, it's definitely going to make it easier. And I love the idea of starting on the ground. I know I have a horse that I just went through that with him. Like, okay, we need to just go back to the basics. And it was like within, you know, a few minutes, I realized how much tension he was carrying just on the ground. And I was like, well, no wonder you're carrying tension under the saddle as well. Like, if we can't communicate on the ground here, starting here, how are we going to be able to communicate on saddle? So I think that's a great starting place for everybody. And you know, you have an extensive dressage background, you have your online platform, but you're also a USDF gold medalist. So with this background, what do you think is the hardest concept in dressage for riders to grasp? And how do you go about explaining that to your riders?
Yeah, so I'm going to say that for sure it's connection. You know, I remember when I was first learning to ride dressage, and I can still hear my trainer like, Rounder, get his head down, Rounder. And like, I remember my arms and my hands were hurting, and I thought, like, this can't be right. You know, like, isn't riding supposed to be all about like softness and lightness? And here we are trying to like just wrestle our horses Rounder. And I think that that is one of the hardest things, is how do you get that nice round frame and maintain it through transitions and into canter work without feeling like you're just pulling on your horse and just wrestling your horse around. And because I've ridden so many different types of horses, and they're all different, right? Like, some of them are hollow, some of them curl, some of them lean on the left rein, like they're all so different. And so I really break it down step by step. And because of my experience with working with a lot of like difficult horses that maybe have training issues, I start on the ground and, just simple stuff like teaching them when you take the left rein, they should bend their head to the left. When you take the right rein, they should bend their head to the right, get them to put their head down. So starting on the ground with that, and then taking what you've taught them on the ground into the under saddle work. I always think that one big piece riders miss is the importance of bending your horse, making sure that your horse can really bend left and bend right. The lateral suppleness is the prerequisite to the longitudinal suppleness and to really getting your horse engaging behind and lifting up through their back. So I really do break it down step by step. I have a 30-day to round challenge, which is like probably everyone's favorite challenge ever, where I go through that step-by-step process of like from the beginning. Let's say you have a horse that has no idea how to go round, how to accept the bit, where do you start, and then how do you solve problems along the way. To the ideal is, I would say the ideal is you want to have about the weight of a soda can in your hand. And then you always want to feel like your horse's neck is adjustable. Like you could lower it, bring it up, bend it left, bend it right. You don't want your horse to feel rigid in the neck. And of course, I just like simplified it. There's so much more to it. But definitely connection is the hardest part. I don't know. Do you agree? Do you think that's the hardest part?
Yeah, I was right when you said that, I was like, that makes, total sense. And it's also something that can always be improved, right? It's always something we should be working towards improving. Like you said, maybe you have the outline correct, but you need to make sure like through the neck, are they just locked there, or do you have that adjustability component? Do you have that ability to move them laterally and to have them truly in your hand that you can at any point in time, ask them to move this part of their body. So I think that is definitely a hard concept, especially for new riders, when you're trying to explain we're going to take this massive animal and be able to just put all these things together and have that communication, nonverbal communication with them. So that makes a lot of sense. And you talked about all of these different horses that you've ridden that has built this knowledge base for you. So what do you do when you get on, first get on a horse? What is kind of your check-in, both with a horse that and let's say you have one of those difficult cases, where do you start with them as well?
It so depends on the horse. But like, so, okay, let's say I first get on the first thing I do is check my position, right? Of course, like you get in the saddle, you're like, okay, is my girth tight? Are my stirrups even? Am I sitting in the saddle? And then number one is forward. I think that's always first. It's getting your horse going forward, getting the rhythm. Like rhythm is the base of the training scale. So I like to spend quite a bit of time walking with my horses. It's really good for their health to give them that time to warm up. And then, of course, for you as a rider, it's a really good chance for you to check in with your position, take some deep breaths, get yourself to relax. And then you can do a lot with your horse at the walk. You can work on suppleness and bending and some lateral work and transitions. Like there's so much that you can do at the walk. And especially for those of you that ride older horses, they need a good 15-20 minutes of just walking before you really start with doing more than that. And then, of course, depending on the horse, I modify my lesson plan. I think that's definitely what I know maybe you struggle with, that is figuring out, like, everyone wants this plan, like this perfect recipe of like, here's what I should do step by step. And it's so different for every horse. So with every horse, you have to figure out what works best for your horse. And in general, like some tips are, if you have a horse that's hotter and more nervous, you're going to want to do more bending lines, circles and serpentines to really get the horse's focus and attention and to help your horse relax. If you have a horse that's a little more like laid back and needs more energy, then you're going to want to change your warm up and do more transitions, like go, come back, make it a little bit more exciting to get them with you. So kind of we do the walk work, then the warm up chunk, that a little bit is tailored to your horse and your horse's temperament and your horse's needs. And then after that, the working section of the ride, that really depends a lot on your level, right? On whether you're kind of starting out and doing training level, or if you're more advanced and doing like the upper levels and the FEI, and you can do half passes and flying changes. But the working section would be, I usually pick like 2 to 3 exercises that are a little bit of a stretch, like a little bit out of your comfort zone, something that you're working towards. You always want to remember to give your horse lots of walk breaks in between each exercise, because the walk is such an important time for your horse to just get oxygen back to their muscles, to recover. It's also an opportunity for you to breathe a few moments, relax, check in with your physician again. So yeah, the ride really depends on what your horse needs, and it's just so different for every horse. But that's also what I love about riding, is that every horse has these unique personalities and needs and characteristics. And when you've ridden a horse for a long time, like my FEI horse Kensington, he's 10 this year. I got him when he was 5. And I know him so well because I've ridden him for 5 years. So I know exactly, like, okay, this is our warm-up routine. This is the exercises. And then I also know sometimes Mondays aren't his best day, so I'm kind of like, well, all right, it's Monday. So maybe we're just going to work on the basics, like rhythm, suppleness, connection. This is not a day to try something new or to go out and ride a test pattern. So you definitely have to be having a plan, but then also able to adjust your plan based on what happens that day. Because we know with horses, like, it could be windy or something's going on next door, and you have to be willing to change your plan.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that you brought up the walk, because I think that is so important. And I know, like, especially this summer for me in Florida, like, there's been a couple rides where I go out and all I'm doing is just working at the walk. And there's so many fun different exercises that you can do, or ground pull exercises that you can do, where you're just working at a walk. And I mean, both me and my horses are like coming away super sweaty because it's hot outside, but still, we're still able to actually get a lot accomplished in the walk, and it slows everything down. It gives me as a rider time to think about my position. And if I'm asking my horse to do this, where do I need to be? And if I'm asking this, what am I actually wanting my horse? I'm a visual person. So I'm thinking, okay, I need their leg to step over, And so I think bringing up that you can actually do quite a bit at the walk, and it's a great place to also start to check in with yourself, check in with your horse. Like you mentioned, you've got to be able to adapt your plan, because sometimes you get on the horse and like, maybe they're just not feeling it today. And you're like, oh, we were going to do XYZ and we're really going to focus on being forward, but maybe today we need to really focus on bending and making sure that they're through their neck and they're feeling tense, and we can't get to that forward point that we wanted to work on. So I think that's a great way to look at it. Each ride is different. You can have a plan, but being able to adapt it, I think is really great. And so we've discussed, kind of all of these different dressage approaches and things like that. Where would you like to see the dressage or the horse industry as a whole grow?
I think education is so important, and I appreciate everything that you do and the nutrition aspect of that as well. But I really believe that the more that we understand like the process and a system of teaching and training our horses, that's really what allows us to train through kindness and through understanding. And I always find that when I'm frustrated with something, like when I'm stuck or I don't know what to do, or my horse isn't doing what I want them to do, it's because they don't understand. And horses, they're not like people. They're not like intentionally plotting against you. Like, I'm going to go out there and just embarrass her and not pay attention and not do what she wants. Like they don't think that way. So if you can't get your horse to do a flying change, or if you can't pick up the right lead canter, it's because your horse doesn't understand what you're asking. And so thinking about how can we break that down into something more simple? Like, what are the steps that I'm missing to help my horse do what I want them to do? And the more education that we can share and help one another. And then also for me, I'm always learning, like I'm always going and getting lessons and trying to work with really good trainers. And then in a lot of our programs, we also bring in, experts in the field and learning from one another and helping one another when you're stuck or when you're like, gosh, I just can't get my horse to do this. What is going wrong? So I think we have to keep educating and keep learning from one another and learning from like the best in the world. And I think through education that we can find ways to communicate through that kindness and through that understanding and really develop amazing relationships and connections with our horses. Because to me, that's what makes it really special is when you have that relationship like with Kensington I talked about, where I just know him so well and I can think it and he does it. And it's like the most incredible feeling ever. So through education, we really you can get there with your horse and it's amazing what you can accomplish. And yeah, it takes a lot of dedication and consistency and hard work. There's definitely no instant gratification in riding. But those little wins along the way, it's so important that we celebrate that. And that goes back to community,
Yes.
Because it's like only your horse friends that really understand, like, oh my gosh, I had like the best canter transition, or like my horse was relaxed today. It was incredible. So you definitely have to celebrate those little wins.
Yeah, that's perfect, right? And building that community, like you were saying, is because you can feel so frustrated and isolated when you're dealing with a problem. And especially like if you get a new horse, or it's a problem you've never had before. And you're like, well, on this other horse, all I had to do was this and it was fine. And that horse completely understood what I was saying. And now I have, a new horse or we're tackling a new challenge and we are speaking different languages. And so to have that community to kind of fall back on and be able to ask the questions without being embarrassed, and but then also to celebrate those little gains and little wins. And at Mad Barn, we always say we're looking for a 1% improvement. So to be able to say, okay, we came out, we're 1% better than we were the last ride or the last show or whatever, and to be able to share that with the community and to have everybody to see you and to also encourage you and to recognize that you're making those changes goes a long way. So that's great. I love to hear that. I do want to switch gears really quickly because I did see some fitness focused posts on your website, and I do think that's a really important topic. And I know for me, I've struggled for a little while, like, okay, what exercises do I do outside of the saddle? And, I'm now working remote I'm not outside working with my horses all day. And so I was really struggling with that personally. So I wanted you to share a little bit about that and maybe tell me how fitness has helped both you as a rider and maybe some of your clients.
Yeah, of course, it's so important because we expect our horses to be like supple and straight and engage their hind end and use their top line. And you really can't expect your horse to do that if you're not doing that. And especially like you mentioned, if you're not riding 10 horses a day, if you sit at a desk a lot, it like fitness is huge and it is so, so important. And so I've always ridden a lot, which of course helps you get fit, but I've also found that it's really important that you do other things like outside of the saddle, because we all have like little asymmetries and little crookednesses in our body. So I actually I had an injury. I broke my collarbone and my ribs, and then after that my trainer was always like, bring your left shoulder back, like bring your left shoulder back. And I just like, I couldn't, like I would try and I just couldn't get myself in that correct position. And so I had a physical therapist come out and she watched me ride. And then she took me off the horse and she was like, okay, do these stretches, do these exercises.
Wow.
Like you've got to strengthen and stretch your shoulder. And then after that, when I was riding, because I'd kind of activated and stretched and I knew what I needed to do with my shoulder, then I could do that in the saddle. So I see that a lot with riders, where I was actually teaching a clinic in Montana last weekend, and there was one rider who was like sitting quite crooked and like collapsing the right side, which is something I see a lot. And she wasn't putting any weight in her like right seat bone. And so I told her, I was like, okay, I want you to start paying attention to like how you're sitting. Like, how are you sitting right now? Do you feel both your seat bones, or are you like only sitting on one seat bone? Are you always collapsing or crossing your legs over? And so those like patterns that you have the other 23 hours of the day are going to transfer over when you sit in the saddle. And really the only way that you can fix your position in the saddle is if you, number one, become aware of it, like whether it's a video or a photo or your trainer telling you like, gosh, you're really crooked. So you have to become aware of it. Then you have to figure out, okay, what can I do out of the saddle that specifically is addressing that issue? Like I mentioned with my left shoulder, I was like, okay, I have these stretches and these exercises and this awareness of it. For the collapsing, which is like, I think that's the biggest thing I see riders doing, is like collapsing their right side and then sitting a little off to the left. And usually that's, you need to strengthen your abs on the right side, like your oblique abs. So doing like a side plank on the right side, and then also your glute med. So your glute med is a really important muscle for riding. It's the side muscle, like your side butt muscle. And that muscle stabilizes your pelvis side to side. So like when you're walking, your glute med helps so that you're not just like collapsing side to side as you're walking. And the glute med muscle does the same thing in the saddle. So you're not going side to side, but it also really helps you to put your leg on correctly and to really wrap your leg around the horse without gripping with your inner thigh. So I definitely recommend working on those glute muscles when you're out of the saddle. And I do have like programs in my library where we look at riders in the saddle, and then based on what we see them in the saddle, then we're like, okay, go do these fitness exercises, come back, ride again. And it's amazing the difference, because when you're riding, you have to be thinking about what your horse is doing. You can't just sit up there and be like, okay, my glute med, you've got to be thinking, go forward, bend, put your head down, don't spook. But so if you can do those exercises before you get on or in between rides, it like makes a world of a difference. And I think too, I have a lot of older riders, and when you're fit and strong, you feel so much more confident and you're less likely to get hurt. And overall, I mean, let's just face it, for our overall health and longevity, your fitness is everything. And if your body isn't healthy, then what's the point? You can't live, you can't ride. So yeah. So fitness is everything.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm sitting here thinking like, oh yeah, that everything you just talked to, that applies to me. I definitely like struggle with those issues, definitely collapsing through there. So I'm like, okay, I need to start working on some of those. My glutes need some help. So, and like making sure I'm not, carrying tension within my hips and things like that, and making sure that we're stretching and doing all that stuff that we expect our horses to do, and to be able to apply it to ourselves, because we have to be able to carry ourselves in order for our horses to then carry us. So that makes a lot of sense. And that's a great platform and a great way for riders to be able to know, okay, maybe I know I have this problem in the saddle, but now what muscles are those and how do I target that? So that's a great resource for everyone to be able to kind of utilize. And so before we end our talk today, I always like to touch on nutrition, since that is the basis of my career. So as a professional, how do you feel your horse's nutrition impacts their performance?
Just like us, it's such an important part of your overall health and well-being. And a funny story, Kensington, a couple of years ago, I was trying to move him like from 4th level up to the FEI, which if you're not familiar with dressage, is definitely a big leap up to the FEI levels. And I was doing all the work, I was like working him 5 days a week and doing the transitions and all the things. And he just wasn't really putting on the muscling in his top line like I wanted. And so I sent in like his diet to a nutritionist, and she was like, well, he really doesn't have enough protein in his diet. And so when I added the protein in, and when he was actually getting the correct nutrition, it was amazing how he just started to put on that top line muscle. So it's not, of course, it's like both things, it was a combination of the work and the nutrition, but it does make like such a big difference. And like I could, like within a few months, I could just see like his top line muscles coming on, and I couldn't see his spine anymore. He had like these nice muscles in his back. And honestly, I felt kind of guilty. I was like, oh, how dumb am I? I should have been giving him the right nutrition all along. But
no,
and
that
then,
makes sense.
yeah, so that is, of course, essential. And then I think also it's really important because the way that we have our horses isn't natural. They're designed to be out in a field grazing all the time, and we put them in stalls and we feed them 3 times a day, and we add all this stress to their life, and that's not natural for them. So I think that we have a responsibility to find ways not only to make sure that they're getting the correct nutrition, but also their gut health. So many horses now have ulcers or gut problems, and we want to keep that in mind. And I know you guys have a lot of amazing products that help with that, because at the end of the day, if your horse doesn't feel good in their health and in their body, and if their tummy is upset, it can be really hard on them. Kensington, actually, I imported him from Europe, and like that's a hard transition for a lot of horses coming from Europe. And he got ulcers. I didn't know it, but he would just like act colicky in the morning. He would like lay down and like paw, and so I had him scoped, and he had ulcers. But the other thing that I didn't realize, coming from like more of a natural horsemanship background, was that some of the spookiness under saddle, like he was a little spooky under saddle. And when I would use my leg on him, he would kind of overreact. And I just thought like, oh, he's young, like it's just training. But part of it was the ulcers. And so, well, I know you know this. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but when they have ulcers and they're cantering around, all the acid is like splashing on their ulcers, and it makes it really uncomfortable for them. So, it's definitely important that we're aware of our horse's health and nutrition in the training. And it's hard, I think, as a rider to figure out what's behavioral, like what's a training issue versus what's something wrong with your horse. And we wish they could talk and say, Mom, my tummy hurts. But of course they can't. So
yeah, I mean, we hear stories like that every day easily, and anytime I'm talking with the high performance riders, or really any rider that's showing their horse, I'm like, the first thing we have to discuss is gut health, because like you said, the environment that we're putting these horses in is stress inducing, right? And that's a lot of these ulcers can just be caused by stress. Even if you have the best program out there, I'm like, we still have to have this discussion, because trailering, exercise, going to these shows is going to introduce stress, which is going to disrupt their gut. So that is a very common topic that we discuss with everybody. And it's something that it's good that people are becoming very aware of that. Like you said, there's symptoms of ulcers, but they're so unique to every horse. And like some horses won't even really show any signs, and then you scope them and they have terrible ulcers. So that's always like the first time I start hearing anything like that, I'm like, time to go to the vet and have this discussion. Because if we're dealing with that, it doesn't matter like how good your exercise program is, or how good your nutrition program is if they've got ulcers, they're going to be in pain, and they're not going to be able to absorb all the nutrients you're giving them. They're not able to utilize themselves properly. So that is definitely a major area of concern. And but it's good to have resources out there, and for people to be aware that that can definitely be going on. So well, thank you for chatting with me today. This has been really fun. And for everybody watching, we'll make sure to link to Amelia Newcomb Dressage in the caption and to all of the resources that we have discussed today. And make sure you subscribe so you are the first to see the new episode of The People Behind the Horses.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.